Mr. Vanderbilt, sir, does your railroad serve the public interest?
The public be damned. Of course we like to do everything possible for the benefit of humanity. But first, we see that we are benefiting ourselves.
With as much passion as they fought urban bosses, muckrakers also attacked the nation's great corporations, or trusts.
Now, if you have a trust, that is a large business working in one sector of the economy, and if you control enough of that economy, then you can raise prices. And this is why people wanted to bust trusts, because the prices were going up. And one way to do that was to break up those big companies.
Ida Tarbell's expose of the Standard Oil Company showed how its president, John D. Rockefeller, gobbled up smaller companies. Other muckrakers focused on the company's mistreatment of workers, especially children.
Crouched over the chutes, the boys sit, hour after hour. Most of them become deformed and bent back like old men. Cut, broken, or crushed fingers are common. John Spargo, 1906.
Upton Sinclair published a novel called The Jungle. Set in the gritty meat-packing yards of Chicago, it exposed the gruesome filth within one of the United States' fastest-growing industries.
Meat was on the floor in the dirt and sawdust where the workers had tramped and spit. Thousands of rats would race about on it. The packers would put poisoned bread out for them, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together.
Like urban bosses, the reformers said, these companies put private profit over public good.
In the late 19th and early 20th century, large numbers of workers were not unionized, did not have representation, could not bargain with their employers. And so if they were in a workspace that was dangerous and they went to their boss and they said, you know, I'm worried about this staircase here because every time I go up and down the staircase, the stair waggles and I'm afraid I'm going to fall down and break my head. And the employer could just say, bye, you're fired. And if something happened, say that worker decided to keep the job, to go up and down the staircase, and one day the stair broke and the worker fell and broke an arm, couldn't work, what do they get? Nothing. So one progressive reform, if you will, was workers' compensation. And workers' compensation means that a worker will get some money either from the state or from the corporation if injured.
Unable to make businesses treat their workers with greater fairness, progressives turned to state and local governments. They won new laws to regulate what railroads and other big companies could charge. They placed restrictions on lobbying and campaign donations by corporations, which had often bribed state legislators. But what if a trust did business in many states? Companies like Standard Oil had operations all over the country. To control these gigantic industries, progressives had to turn to the federal government. In the White House, they found a supporter in the youngest man to ever occupy the nation's highest office. An asthmatic child, frail and sickly, Theodore Roosevelt developed into an avid rider, a skilled hunter, and a symbol of everything that was manly about the United States.
He wore a tall black hat, and he strode along with the physical power of a landslide. Never before or since have I been so much impressed by the physical impact of a human being. Hutchins Hapgood.
As president, Roosevelt boasted that he would bust America's trusts, but Teddy's trust busting was more talk than action. Instead of dividing trusts into smaller companies, Roosevelt tried to regulate them. To address the meatpacking horrors that Upton Sinclair described, Roosevelt signed the Meat Inspection Act, which required refrigeration and other health precautions. To control the sale of harmful patent medicines, he backed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which banned false labeling on packages. And to conserve the nation's dwindling forests, Roosevelt placed millions of acres under federal management. But who exactly would administer these new laws and protect the public's interests? In case after case, the answer was the same: a federal agency or department. The Meat Inspection Act authorized a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to examine meat packing. The Pure Food and Drug Act created the Food and Drug Administration to approve any new drug for sale. The new national forests were administered by a Bureau of Forestry, which would evolve into the United States Forest Service.
Governors of the several states and gentlemen, the occasion for this meeting lies in the fact that the natural resources of our country are in danger of exhaustion if we permit the old, wasteful methods of exploiting them longer to continue. As a people, we have a right and duty to protect ourselves and our children against the wasteful development of our natural resources. President Theodore Roosevelt, National Conservation Congress, 1908.
Fighting big business, progressivism helped create big government and cemented the marriage between them both.
Before that, the federal government had largely been responsible for taxes on imports and exports and for having an army. It had not been responsible for making sure that if people got hurt on the job, that they could get some kind of care. It had not been responsible for making sure that food was safe to eat. That was the national level reform. These were new ideas that the government should be involved in those issues.
The progressives also turned to the federal government to manage the nation's diminishing share of natural resources. By 1900, the government had sold or given away most of the publicly owned lands in the western part of the country. Claiming to speak for the larger interests of society and future generations, Roosevelt added more than 100 million acres to the national forest system and prosecuted hundreds of violators of public land laws, recovering millions of acres which were placed under federal management. Roosevelt's objective was to conserve national resources for future use.